Hey guys, you're watching TechEdit. I'm Basil. This is the BlackView BL9000 Pro 5G. It's a mouthful, and you've got a big name for a very big phone with a huge 8,800 milliamp battery, a ginormous 512 gigabytes, despite this thing's asking price, 50 megapixel camera with OIS, Harman Kardon tuned booming speakers. There is a lot of tech in here and a lot of value for money. There's also a thermal imaging camera, which is very interesting. I'll come on to all of that in a sec, and the areas it isn't quite so peachy. Before I do, if you're not already subscribed to the channel, please do. It's how you're going to stay on top of everything that I do. In a nutshell, this phone is a beefcake with a superpower. That superpower being thermal imaging. It has FLIR technology, which is kind of the industry standard, so it can get really accurate readings of anything you point it at. A pet, for example, in a room. If you can't find it, this thing should pick up its heat signature, which is very cool. If you go on BlackView's product page of this thing, it suggests you do things like point it at your partner while they're proposing to make sure their feelings are authentic and their body temperature has risen enough, or point it at strangers on a train to make sure that you don't get whatever lurgy they have. I wouldn't recommend either of those situations, at least not without the other person's permission. But I can definitely attest to this thing being really useful in practical day-to-day things. If you're a baker, tempering chocolate, for example, or even making sure your baby's milk is at the right temperature. What's also cool is it has a MediaTek 8020 inside, which isn't the most powerful chipset in the world, but it can handle well-optimized games like Genshin perfectly well. And with 12 gigabytes of RAM and that massive 512 gigabytes of storage, you really are set up for a pretty quality experience despite the mid-range price on this thing. The speakers are also tuned by Harman Kardon, and this phone gets so loud. And the flashlight's really bright. So there are some highlights that are worth going into in more detail, and that's what I'm going to do now, starting with the design of this thing. And like I said, this thing is heavy at 412 grams, 17 millimeters thick as well. It is definitely not skinny jeans friendly, but with reinforced corners that have a kind of like rubberized finish, and the whole frame being quite grippy, as well as a textured back for added grip. It definitely feels solid in the hand. Feels a little bit like a weapon, but as much as it's grippy, it's also relatively slippy just because it's so heavy. So if you haven't got a good hold on it, it could just fall on the floor. Honestly though, I wouldn't be too stressed if it did fall on the floor. The flat corners feel and are relatively shockproof, so I don't anticipate it'll be shattering that Gorilla Glass Victus screen unless it falls face down on a jagged surface. It has a pre-fitted screen protector as well. As far as the ports go, down at the base, the USB-C port is covered with a flap. Now this is a potential weak point if the flap breaks off, for example, and that would impact the IP68 and IP69K water resistance, which is the highest grade of ingress protection that you can get. So really good at handling even high temperature water, as well as submersion and all of that jazz. The SIM card slot on the left hand side looks like a fingernail can pull it out, but don't try that because it's metal and it will chip your fingernail. You need a SIM eject tool or something, screwdriver, to get that out. Left hand side, there's a customizable button, and there are these kind of metal plate elements to make it feel like it means business on the left and right. The buttons on the right hand side include a volume rocker and a power button that has a fingerprint scanner as well. Nice and responsive, and all the buttons on here have a really nice click feedback too. You can pick up the BL9000 Pro in black with either black accents as I've got here or a gold accent around the camera. There's no headphone jack, which is interesting, not even under any flaps, but you do get a notification light, which is a bit of a unicorn on phones today. So yeah, this thing is big, definitely not skinny jean friendly, but it makes a really bold impression, and I don't hate the design for what it is, a rugged phone that stands out. Onto the screen, and while it isn't a high point, it definitely isn't a bad panel in isolation. Unfortunately, BlackView didn't go with an OLED display, so you don't have those deep, dark, inky blacks you are getting on more and more budget phones today, but it's smooth with a 120 Hz refresh rate. Resolution-wise, it's Full HD Plus with a 6.78-inch size. And that means you get 396 pixels in every inch of screen, which is relatively sharp. With a maximum display brightness of 600 nits, it isn't as bright as I'd want it to be outdoors on a super sunny day. Here in the UK, even when it was bright, I could still see what was going on sunny days, but I can imagine if you're somewhere super sunny, this won't be great. Indoors though, it did the job nicely, and there's an eye-friendly mode as well that ups that orange filter, dials back the blue light. On low brightness, I did notice a little bit of ghosting, so definitely isn't the most premium visual experience around. But for standard things you do on a phone, using it day to day, watching movies, playing games, it's definitely up to the task. And it's also relatively responsive as well. So not amazing, but neither are there any real red flags. On to the star of the show, which is a thermal imaging camera, and it's a FLIR Lepton 3.5 camera with the MyFlir app, which if you've used the FLIR camera on an Android phone before, you'll know is pretty customizable and powerful as well. What I love about this is the accuracy of the imaging. I have a Pixel 8 Pro. This is much more accurate and reliable, and also because you can see a map of what you're taking a temperature of, you can make sure you're pointing it at exactly what you intend to. The app is really customizable. Of course, you can take a photo with a heat map and also a temperature point plotted. You can also capture video, record a time lapse, or broadcast to YouTube Live. Change the color of the heat map and set different points at which to take the temperature, or an average across a box, across a line. The customization options are plenty. What's also cool is you can composite an image from the thermal camera and the main camera, changing the opacity so you can see exactly what you're pointing your camera at, not just some big orange splodge. But the experience isn't perfect. For example, it takes a very long time to fire up the thermal imaging camera. And once you do have to go into the settings to sort out the alignment between the thermal camera and your main camera when you do want to grab that composite. But once done, and if you're okay with the waiting, it's very useful. In fact, the thermal imaging camera kind of takes this phone outside rugged phone territory and makes it a bit of a Swiss Army knife in your household. I just ended up using it for things I didn't think I would. And in the phone, out of the box, you get a toolkit as well that gives you a barometer, a compass, a sound level meter, which I use now all the time when I'm reviewing a phone. Rather than downloading a dodgy third-party app, there is one on here. Also has a plumb bob so you can make sure things are level, and a tool so that you can hang pictures and they are nice and straight. So what I'm basically saying is this kind of stops feeling like a typical phone and kind of just feels like a bit of a toolkit extension in my home now, which is pretty sweet. The 50 megapixel camera around the back is perfectly good in decent or bright conditions. When it's too bright though, the dynamic range can struggle. Highlights will peak a little bit, which you won't get in some comparably priced phones. So this definitely isn't the best camera phone at its price. 50 megapixels, 1/1.57 inch sensor, which isn't too bad, and there's OIS on the lens as well. So it can definitely hold things together. There's some computational photography happening too. You can see it compositing pictures once you take your shot. And in the 50 megapixel mode where you get full resolution photos, there's none of that compositing. So you can get a quality photo, especially if you have a really steady hand, but any handshake will come through, especially if the lights drop. The ultra wide camera is fine in bright environments, but as soon as it gets dark, it's going to really struggle. And the main camera, I try and get on a surface or hold super steady if it's a dark scene, so you can get the best shot possible. That lack of stabilization, despite the OIS, extends to video as well. It isn't the steadiest video I've captured by a long stretch on a phone at the BlackView BL9000 Pro's price. So if you do want the most quality video around, look to some other options from Xiaomi, Poco, etc. But irrespective, it does the job. The 50 megapixel front camera as well can take a good selfie, not too averse to grain, doesn't over beautify you in standard selfie mode, which I really appreciate, though there is a separate beauty mode for that crazy big eye beautification. Video, again, also relatively shaky, handshake does come through, so try and get it steadied. But I was as impressed with the selfie camera as I was with a rear camera. Can be good, very seldom great. Definitely better stuff out there, but still, that doesn't detract from the value for money package that's on offer here. That value for money is really spearheaded by that 512 gigabytes of storage, UFS 3.1 storage, so relatively fast for the price as well. That's plenty for all the games you're going to want. You can whack a ton of movies on here too, and you won't even touch the sides. It's really, really solid. 12 gigabytes of RAM as well, paired with that MediaTek 8020 chipset. You can up the RAM by 24 gigabytes, which I probably wouldn't recommend because virtual RAM isn't ideal for performance. Still, 12 gigabytes is what I used it on, and it was very good. I played Genshin Impact on here for ages, and because that game is so well optimized, I was able to get hours of gameplay on it and relatively smooth gameplay at medium graphics settings. Now this phone geek benches at 3480, and it also got a wildlife score of 4235. So not awful by any stretch, which kind of explains the smooth day-to-day performance. If you are a gamer thinking about picking up this phone for hours, days of gaming though, I would be a little bit cautious. Genshin is an oddity because it's so well optimized by Hoyoverse. Wuthering Waves, by contrast, is significantly more juddery. It isn't as well optimized. It's a newer game, so don't pick this up thinking you can play every single 3D title out there at medium graphic settings or higher. I mentioned the fingerprint scanner is really secure, and this thing also has a really responsive face unlock as well. So getting into the phone quickly, relatively securely, there's no Face ID or anything like that, is a piece of cake. The speakers on this thing are very loud, and that is a good and a bad thing. It's a good thing because if you want a portable speaker as well as a phone, then that's what you get in the BL9000 Pro. But at minimum volume, for some strange reason, BlackView's tuned the speakers to still be very loud, louder than a lot of other phones at middling volume. Kind of crazy. So it kind of, when you drop the volume all the way, goes from relatively loud to mute. Not particularly handy when you like to listen to a podcast or something in bed and you don't want to disturb your flatmate, for example. So that's definitely worth bearing in mind, and I hope with a software update BlackView optimizes that. But on the plus side, if you are using this on something like a building site as a speaker, you will probably be able to hear it through power tools. As well as the speaker volume, which is pretty immense, the quality is not bad either. It hasn't got the rounded depth of an iPhone, for example, or a ROG Phone 7 with an Aeroactive cooler, but it still gives you a very easy to listen to sound at 50-60% volume, perfectly good for podcasts and tunes while you're in the shower. Running Android 14 with a relatively clean skin over the top, BlackView's made something that feels quite off the shelf, but not bad. It's smooth, it's stable for the most part. The only issue I had with stability was I had a Wi-Fi screen crash when I tried to log in with my SIM card. But given I've been using this phone for 3 weeks, a little bit more, and that was my only stability issue, it definitely isn't bad going, again, considering the price of this thing. Now, there are some other highlights. Google highlights, for example, it has NFC and supports Google Pay, the Google Play Store, obviously, and Android Auto as well. And it's also nice that BlackView has some more customizable highlights that it's put on here. Glove mode, you can interact with it with a pretty thick glove and it still works And there's also a slightly dodgy but also potentially useful call recorder tool as well. And it just saves your calls as an MP3 on the phone. The 8,800 milliamp battery inside the BL9000 Pro is huge. It's basically two batteries and it charges very quickly to 120 watts, giving you a full charge in under an hour, which might not be the fastest around, but given the capacity, I'm not complaining. There is no wireless charging on here. As far as battery life goes, I was honestly expecting it to be a little bit better, especially given the Sony Xperia 1 Mark 6 I just reviewed with its 5,000 milliamp battery lasted for 2 days. This thing won't last much longer than that. You can get into a third day, and if you switch it off at night, you can use it for 3 days, but it definitely isn't the most efficient device around. For example, a 40-minute Genshin Impact session drained it by 10%, which means you can play for hours still, which is cool, but it definitely isn't a multi-day gaming camera device. If you're picking it up as a second phone, a work phone, for example, it can potentially last much longer though, so even give you 4 days or so battery. And so if you're looking for a new phone, don't mind something a bit off the wall. The BlackView BL9000 Pro could be a fun choice. There's a lot in this phone to love. 512 gigabytes of storage, 8,800 milliamp battery, obviously fast charging, 120 watts at the price is also excellent, and it's very durable too, as well as obviously that thermal imaging camera. Of course, if you're a tradesperson, it's a bit of a no-brainer to consider it because it's one of the only phones that can do what it can, especially with this kind of power, because a lot of more durable phones have very pared back specs, but the MediaTek 8020 really does come through here. I found myself using the thermal imaging camera in loads of situations, not least of all as a tech reviewer, testing the thermals of gadgets that I am reviewing, but also the toolkit, the sound meter reader, and just generally speaking, it's a very useful household phone, second phone, and like I said, if you're looking for a more off-the-wall, oversized option as a primary phone too. Let me know what you think in the comments section below. This is the first rugged phone I've tested on this channel, so I'd be really curious to know your thoughts, and if you're thinking about picking one up, I've left an affiliate link in the pinned comment below as well, so if you click that, you can get some money off, and I can earn some commission to put to future videos too. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. Thumbs up button, subscribe, and all that good stuff. Have a great day.